Okay, we'll start the session. Welcome all of you. We are having the session under the track of poverty. Under that specific topic is shifting intra-gender household roles, in which we are adding, extending the topic a bit. The organizers have given intra-gender roles. We are also asking the role of other stakeholders like community and businesses in that. Because when we say intra-gender, intra-household gender roles, we might limit our understanding to only the family. But we are talking about the roles beyond the family also in this presentation, even though the topic specified to us is intra-gender. So I have the pleasure to introduce the four panelists. Each one of them will speak for 15 minutes. I'll introduce them. Professor Renu Singh, she has over 26 years teaching experience in policy analysis and research, general and special education, teacher education, early childhood development, both in India and abroad. She's currently working as director of an organization called Young Lives. University of Oxford also she's working, is a project. It's based in India. Project is based in India. And she's a visiting professor at Jamia Millia University. So welcome Dr. Renu Singh. So I think I'll introduce all together and then 15 minutes each on them. We have Suhail Abua Samit, yeah. He's a human rights activist, advocate with a long history in community development, community engagement, project coordination, research and international development. He has been working on gender and sexuality for over 12 years in both local community-based and international settings. So currently he is working on a project through the White Ribbon campaign based in Toronto, Canada, with an international scope on engaging boys and men to end gender-based violence. We have Ramona Ridolfi, who is representing an organization called Helen Keller International. I'm sure most of you know the organization, the name Helen Keller, who has fought blindness. She's a renowned world leader. So in her memory, this institute is there, which is working on blindness as well as malnutrition, if you know. So in Bangladesh, she's from HKI, that is Helen Keller Institute International, Bangladesh. In 2012, she joined as a gender advisor, and she's now as a general manager there, leading gender integration across projects. She's also the co-founder and chair of NGO's National Gender Working Group since February 2013, leading a network of 35 organizations in Bangladesh. So, welcome. And then we have the fourth speaker, Daivashala Giri from Mumbai. She has around 25 years experience in the developmental sector. The initial 10 years she was working as a teacher, and the phrase personal is political is so much applicable to her that during her presentation we'll come to know something about her personal which brought her to this work, because as a teacher when she was there, she had to leave because she was labeled as a bad teacher. And bad teacher because she liked a particular boy, a particular man, when at that time at the age of 15 she was married. This is post-marriage. She liked a particular boy, and that was not looked as a good thing, so she had to leave. And she brought bad name not only to the school but also the family. So as a result, her journey started. So we have a wonderful person who is, and at the age of 22, she had 3 children. And thereafter, her journey started, that why this has happened to her, where she explored herself. And then through various movements like the Foundation for Research in Community Health in Mumbai, under the Dr. Antias, you might have been knowing, is a well-known plastic surgeon. So under his guidance, community-based medical, especially health-related work was pioneered here in India. So she had the opportunity to work there. Thereafter, Vacha and several other groups she has worked. She is a freelancer and a trainer and consultant, and she has written a book very interesting which has traditional games titled Aple Khe Arogyashi Mel. Very interesting. So welcome, Jaishala. Daivashala will be talking in Hindi, and I'll try to take the essence, and there are enough people here who are associated with her project who can translate if required in English. So we'll give the first thing to Dr. Renu Singh. What we are having is after each person 15 minutes, and at the end 15 minutes, because of the paucity of time, we'll have interaction at the end. She's using slides.
Yeah, I'm going to be using slides, and thank you all the post-lunch session. So I know I hope we keep to time, and I'll quickly get into telling you a little bit about the research that I'm involved in. This is led by University of Oxford, and it's an international study on childhood poverty. Therefore, it fits into this session very well. We're following 12,000 children from 2002 onwards. We are now in our 14th year of research. 4 rounds have been done, and we are trying to understand the causes and consequences of childhood poverty, and of course look at how do we develop and implement policies and programs that would reduce childhood poverty. So ours is a pro-poor sample in Ethiopia, Peru, Vietnam and India. In India, our data is in Andhra Pradesh and now Telangana as well. And I'm going to draw from the India data today in what I'm going to share with you. So if you see, in 2002 when we began, we had 2,000 children who were 1 year old and 1,000 children who were 8 in India. Now in 2013, the 1 year olds we have now turned 12 and the older ones are now 19. And I'm going to draw on all the quantitative and qualitative research from this sample that we are following closely across the years. It's a mix of urban and rural sites that we have in our sample in 98 communities, and we are now in 4 districts of Andhra Pradesh and 3 districts of Telangana. For those of you who don't know, very recently this year we had a bifurcation of the state. So earlier we were in 1 state, now suddenly we are in 2. And I'll give you more details, but we cover tribal sites, so we are in Srikakulam, for example, and we try and our sites have been chosen so that we are representative of the various social categories as well. I'm going to especially draw on when in terms of violence. I'm going to talk about corporal punishment and how children view it from the perspective of children, because our data, we are child-centered and we draw voices of children. So, and to be honest, this is the first time I'm in a gender symposium because I'm a child rights activist, and I'm very happy to hear a whole lot of other things, because it's strange how even child activists actually don't really talk to gender activists. So it's great because I'm meeting new people and not the same people this time. So it's wonderful being here. But just to say that, so in terms of corporal punishment, we're looking at infliction of pain, and this could be confinement, it could be penalty for an offense, and I just want to show you a picture. This is a very familiar scene. This is the government school of Delhi, and why do you think these children are doing what they're doing? Yeah, because they've just come late. They just come late. So every morning, and I was in the school observing, every morning the same scene used to play out. And children, and if you can see there, they just stand there with, holding their ears as though that's going to suddenly help them not come late, for whatever reason. But going back to, and this is Delhi, this is not Young Lives, but I'm just trying to, position the political and the cultural context in which I'm talking. Definitely research over the last 40 years has consistently shown that, hitting children does not help. Even psychologically, as they grow up, they become more physically aggressive. But the question is here, we have only one study on violence against children, and that's a Government of India MWCD study, which was conducted and in 2007, and even that looked at children across the ages of 5 to 18 years across 13 states and found 69% of the children had reported physical abuse. And boys were more likely to face physical abuse, 73% than the girls. And amongst those children who, talked about physical abuse by members outside the family, teachers. And I know I'm a teacher as well, so you know why. We're constantly being told that yes, so teachers were the main people who were seen as being, aggressors in terms of outside the family. What is very interesting is that even when you conduct research, children will often not want to talk about being abused. There is great hesitation, and therefore in a survey it's hard to capture, but in qualitative research it's much easier to actually sit down and use methods which will draw out children to be talking about. So and because of paucity of time, I'm not going to dwell too much on this, and I'm going to straight move on to the policy context, just to say India is a signatory to the UNCRC, where Article 19 very clearly says all forms of physical or mental violence children have to be protected from. We have a national charter for children, national plan of for children, not only 2006, now we have a new one which actually prohibits corporal punishment, and even in schools. We also have a High Court judgment of 2000 which directed the state to ensure that children are not subjected to punishment in schools. It's strange because all these are about school. Nobody's talking about the home, by the way. Yeah. So yes, we need to capture children's voices and young lives. I think has been able to pay attention to this because we've had direct questions to children during our survey rounds, where we asked children, have you been beaten? Have you witnessed other children being beaten up? We've used qualitative research where we've had them draw about how they're doing well, how they're doing badly, what makes them happy, what makes them unhappy. So through those methods we're able to draw out the experience of violence. And of course older children it's much easier to talk, but I'm talking of the younger ones as well, because it's you need to also bring closure if they're sharing anything. This is some of the data. So in the blue is the older cohort. This is in round 3, which means when they were 15. Yeah, this is when they were the 15-year-olds, and these are the 8-year-olds so look at the difference of even witnessing corporal punishment and experiencing corporal punishment. The younger children, aged 8, had experienced much more punishment than the older ones. So age has a huge role to play, and I'll come to that later. We also asked them, how many of you have been hit once or twice, all the time? Have you seen hit others once or twice, the teacher hit others all the time? Look at all the time again, 52% of the younger cohort talked about the 8-year-olds all the time they were being hit. And 33%, a third of the children talked about amongst the older ones, were being hit all the time. These are experiences, everyday experiences of children. So I'm just going to move to voices, some of the voices. So what are children saying through the interviews and so one of the children says, if we are not naughty and listen to what the sirs are saying, then they don't beat us. Some children keep staring outside the windows, therefore they beat us. Just look at the way children respond, some of the children. But there are others who say, we fear that madam very much. When a boy was making noise, he was kept standing outside the classroom after removing his dress. So we fear the teacher very much. One student was beaten so severely for not attending the class because he escaped the class to buy a samosa. I hope some of you have eaten a samosa, for those who've come from outside. The wrap, it is brilliant, yeah. So he went to buy a samosa, and what happens? He is hit by the teacher and he dies on the spot. Since then, they put a system of not beating the students. In another school, also one boy died. This is a young child telling us this. Government school student says, I don't like my school since the teachers beat me badly. They beat me with a stick on my back. Even if they are sitting and talking, I don't complain because they only beat because we must study well. Another child says, a 12-year-old, the teacher should not beat too much. Neither should they not beat at all. If it should be some way in between. If they are disciplined, they will learn out of fear. Look at this an environment of fear that we built up. In the first standard, the teacher used to beat very little, but in the second, they beat very hard. We are becoming bigger. They beat us so that we learn, but it hurts. Teachers beat with a stick, which will be bought by the students from the nearby bushes. Teachers use only thin sticks, which are not dry. The dry ones will break easily, but if they are wet, they will not break and they'll be sharper. Hence, teachers always keep only wet, thin sticks with them. It's a 15-year-old child telling us this. Children learn from smacking to respect their parents. This is a parent, by the way. Now, this is the parent's voice. Children learn from smacking to respect their parents and teachers, to distinguish right from wrong, to obey rules and work hard. Without corporal punishment, children will be spoilt and undisciplined. We talk of violence. These are the roots of violence. This is where it all begins. We can't only work with men and women. It has to start much earlier. Look at the experience of, I have only 4 minutes left. Okay. Experience of corporal punishment by caste. Can you see by caste? SC stands for scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, backward class, other castes. Other castes are the most privileged. Can you see how the scheduled castes of the Dalits, once or twice, they're talking of being beaten up the maximum. But in terms of all the time, I think that seems to be no difference. But just to a caveat, we have a pro-poor sample. We don't have middle-class children in this sample. This is a pro-poor sample that we are following. And if you look at girls and boys, 40% of the boys, highly significant statistically, experience physical punishment in the last week as compared to girls. Poorest quintile, again, statistically significant, 40% compared to 28.7% in the least poor quintile. So we can't call them rich, they're the poorest and the least poor. But even amongst them there is a difference. And surprisingly, in urban areas, children had more beating than in rural areas. Now I don't know whether it is a reporting that's not happening or whether actually rural schools have more punishment because there are bigger expectations from children. And this is school, this is only school. So probably there are huge expectations. I don't know. This is and yes, that's a very important point. Sometimes a higher number of students because but even in rural schools, the classrooms are multi-grade teaching. They don't have one class. They actually, there are larger number even though there is 4 grades put together. So I don't know what. I'll just end with 1 or 2 because I have very little time and I want to just, put it all together. But I want to draw the links between poverty and corporal punishment. So Ranadeep, and I want to draw from what the children are saying how he was involved in cotton pollination work and missed school. So many of our children actually combine school and work. And he says, when I returned back to school, they beat me. They hit me because I didn't go to school for a month and they taught lessons I missed. He also experiences abuse at home. He says, entire village is in a bad drinking habit. They drink alcohol and create a nuisance. My father goes for work and comes back drunk and beats my mother. If I go in the middle, he will beat me. That's why I don't like this village and the surroundings. I want to take my mother and leave this village. When I grow up, I would like to be good. I will love my wife and not drink liquor or smoke bidi. Bidi is the Indian tobacco leaf. I would like to be good. I will study up to class 10 and start a shop. This is where the changes are happening, and I think the session is all about the changes that are happening. And I don't know whether we can say everything is black and white because this is a child who's experiencing violence at the moment. Ramya explains the difficulties that she faces in having to manage work again and school. I get hurt if teachers scold me. Sometimes they beat us. Madam beats us more. It's not that the women teachers don't beat, by the way. She sometimes beats with a stick. All teachers hold a stick whether they beat or not to discipline the students. If we do not complete our homework, she beats. If we are not regular, she beats. And Yashwant says, I have only 2 uniforms. I don't go to school because the PT teacher will beat me. My mother may not have washed my clothes due to lack of time. These are poor children whose mothers are also daily wage earners. And boys are saying, Teachers will beat with sticks, with rulers, will make us sit on our haunches, our legs swell up. They also abuse us and use foul language and say we look like bullocks and donkeys, and that the herdsman is better than us. This is a translation from Telugu, so it's not perfect. This makes us very sad. Ravi, I will just end with Ravi, who says he's been forced into bonded labor because his grandfather took a loan. His father is an alcoholic, and even though an NGO wanted to support their education, he could not continue education. So he goes and starts working for the landlord, and he says, I was asked to sweep, clean and pile up the cow dung. They beat me with a stick if I didn't turn up for work. He goes for Diwali. I haven't put the whole thing. He goes to celebrate Diwali with his family. Then he comes back, he's beaten up black and blue, and he becomes unconscious. And he says, I'm made to sleep with the cows, and it's nauseating to pile up the garbage, the dung and the worms. It is repulsive. So gendered violence is continuing in the homes, and we find young girls talking even about their sister-in-laws, who they will say things like, I have to go to work, I have to come back and continue cooking food, washing clothes. I think I have to stop. And one of them says, it's the brother's influence. Sister-in-laws will not work as long as brothers, sisters are around. I'm bringing this into the whole thing of this feminists and the gender movement. The women, they're concerned with all they earn will be given as dowry to the brothers, sisters. They will only go to work once we are married. So you're finding how the relationships are working out. It's not just one way. So all I want to end by saying is, how do we change this power dynamics? Because violence is rooted in power dynamics, whether it is between the parent and the child, the teacher and the student. It's not about just boys and girls, and we do find that boys are witnessing much more punishment than girls physically. Is it because we believe that we are socializing them to be man? Is that where it starts? Thank you very much. There's a lot of papers on our website if you want to just note that down.
There's one folder only which has all the books. Is your name there?
Yep. You wrote them? Okay.
So good afternoon, everyone. For those who joined us a little later, my name is Ramona Ridolfi, and I'm the General Manager at Helen Keller International in Bangladesh. So it is my pleasure to be here today and to present the work of HKI in Bangladesh. Quick overview of my presentation. I'm briefly going to touch on the background, the cultural background in Bangladesh, for which we need men and boys in nutrition programming, and moving on to HKI's approach to including men and boys in behavior change strategies with some results, and what's coming up next in our programs. So why we need men and boys? Well, stunting, which is chronic child malnutrition in Bangladesh, has been declining twice as fast as the rest of the world. However, still last year it affected about 37% of children under the age of 5, which means about 6 million children. As you know, most nutrition and food security interventions tend to target women. We do nutrition education, breastfeeding education with women. However, HKI in the country runs a food security and nutrition surveillance program nationwide, and the results are pretty clear. Women normally tend to go to their husbands when it comes to seeking advice on nutrition information, and likewise also the husbands are the ones who have the major influence on the nutrition of the women or the nutrition of the child. So this clearly tells us that educating women alone might not be sufficient. Now, obviously, the situation of undernutrition in Bangladesh, it's a very complex problem where, economic, social, cultural factors interact. Here I'm just going to briefly focus on the cultural ones, the cultural practices that we work on through our behavior change interventions. One is child marriage and early pregnancy. Bangladesh has the third highest rate of child marriage in the world. Average age of child marriage is about 15, and it's also practice that girls get pregnant within the first year of marriage. So by the age of 16, 15 and a half, they're already pregnant. Unequal food distribution within the household. Men and boys tend to get the most nutritious food, not necessarily more, but the most nutritious, such as meat or fish. Women's low decision-making power in the household, so ability to decide for themselves, and their limited mobility and ability to purchase nutritious food. So that led us, in the past few years, to think about whether we should focus on women or we should start adopting this idea of gender transformative approaches that I'm sure all of you have heard a lot about in the past few days. So for those who don't know HKI, very quickly, we focus on setting sets of lives for the most vulnerable and disadvantaged. In practical terms, we have food security and nutrition programming in 22 countries across Asia and Africa. What we do is, our signature program is the Homestead Food Production Program, where we empower women, very broad terms, with homestead food production, access to markets that enables them to have an income and a higher status within the family, and target both women and men with nutrition education and behavior change strategies. So we started adopting at HKI Bangladesh a gender focus since about 2008 in USAID-funded real projects. We introduced the homestead food production with a focus on women, and without involving men, we just ensured that gardening wasn't a time burden for women. So just very simple, we started measuring whether access to income led to an increased status within the family for women. 2010, USAID-led Nobo Jibon project, led and implemented by Save the Children. We offer technical assistance for gender and behavior change. So we started introducing some behavior change tools to engage men and women in nutrition education, and we'll see that in a moment. Finally, last year, we tested our first gender transformative intervention, where we target women, their husbands, their in-laws, because in some parts of northwest Bangladesh, the mother-in-law has the biggest say in what the child should eat. And we'll see that shortly as well. So, Nobo Jibon, in our formative research, we found out that men drive decisions like food purchase and production, which impact nutrition, especially because women have a better knowledge of what is nutritious food as opposed to men. So what we developed are three types of behavior change tools. One was the nutritious food poster for households. So we get couples in a group to look at different food groups and discuss what is a nutritious plate. They have an example there, and they have to discuss why pregnant and lactating women should get a certain amount of food, why children under the age of 2, under the age of 5 should get another type or amount of food. And then we introduced a maternal child health and nutrition calendar for households starting from the first month of pregnancy until 6 months postpartum, including special sections for breastfeeding instructions, delivery preparation, and danger signs of pregnancy. So again, this was one session per month with women and their husbands, pregnant women, and then they would get to have the calendar in the household for reference. And finally, a board game. So it's a dice game with a red dot and a green dot. They throw the dice. If they pick a green card, it's a good practice around nutrition and maternal health, and they have to describe it to the rest of the group and discuss why it's a positive practice. On the contrary, the red one is a negative practice, and they get to discuss why it's bad for them and what should they do to change it. So one OB/GYN, as I said, was focusing just on women and their husbands, and that was in southern Bangladesh. HK has also been working in northern Bangladesh, northwest, for the past 10-15 years, and that's where we observed that it wasn't really just the husband deciding about the nutrition of the family, but the mothers-in-law, or sometimes a sister-in-law or a father-in-law, depending on who was present within the household. So we elaborated this Nurturing Connections program, which is a behavior change tool, a series of sessions, 8 to 12 sessions, takes about 3 to 5 months to implement in the field, together with the homestead food production and our essential nutrition action training. So what is different is, first of all, we recognize that women and men exist in a multidimensional system of gender relations, which influence their ability to apply their learning, to purchase nutritious food, to access market, to access food. And so we recognize that malnutrition in Bangladesh couldn't be addressed without talking about the discriminating gender relations and norms. Like in OB/GYN, it has participatory methodologies that enable even those who are not literate to participate. So it's about role play, it's about drawing activities, telling a story. So even if you can't read and write, you can take part, and that's, very suitable for the in-laws. And it recognizes the power of the group dynamics. Now, this is a major change, because before, in OB/GYN, we're getting women and their husbands to sit together and talk. Now we have a group of women, a group of their husbands, and a group of the in-law. I know this has been often contested as perpetrating the division of gender relations, but it's safer for women to speak and open up, because if a woman is suffering violence, is suffering unequal food distribution, can't access the food, she won't say that in front of the husband. So it's safer for them to say that first in their own peer group, and then at the end of a series of sessions, when they've talked about and explored the discriminating practices, we get them together in a mediated group and say, what have you learned in the past month? What are the changes that we could bring within your household? So a quick overview of the content of the curriculum. So initially we just do some games about communication skills, how to open up, how to speak freely and openly. We look into understanding perceptions on gender. We have this situation, might mean something to me, might be seen differently by my husband or my mother-in-law. And then we talk about negotiating power relations. Why does my husband get more food? Why does he have more power? Why does he have a higher status? And vice versa, for the husband or for the mother-in-law. And finally, we act for change. We look for solutions. This is the most popular game in the field. We get 6 volunteers to play the role of a family is about to sit down and have dinner. We give a shopping bag of food to the woman and say, plate the food for dinner. You'll find 99% of cases she gives meat and fish to the boy and to the husband, then to the father-in-law, then to the mother-in-law, and then herself and the daughter. And then we discuss, so have you seen this kind of distribution before? Is it typical in your family? How often does it happen? Why does it happen? And so on, and we go on for 45 minutes. Some results, so OB/GYN, unfortunately, I don't have them ready because they're coming up next month. But Nurturing Connections pilot test that was done last year in 40 producer groups, you can see that the proportion of women, this graph represents the proportion of women who received assistance from their husbands for household activities. And you can see how it increased in almost all domains apart from gardening, because that's a domain that we promote as a women's domain through the homestead food production. But certainly the help in child care, cooking, cleaning was increased significantly. And also...
So just quickly, there's no comparison group, right? It's just baseline and endline.
Mm-hmm. And so there was also... We also looked for decision-making power, which increased over child health care, and family or relatives visits, which has to go with women's mobility. We also tested Nurturing Connections in 1,000 Most Critical Days program, again led by Save the Children in a consortium of partners, 5 partners, multi-sectorial, and there are a couple of case studies while we're waiting for the final results about a husband and a mother-in-law understanding the importance of the woman and the child getting the adequate nutrition and helping in domestic work so that she has more time for exclusive breastfeeding. What's coming up next, as I have 1 minute exactly, so Nurturing Connections, and I know that I was very brief, so I'm happy to talk more during the question and answer session, but it's been well received in Bangladesh. Our colleagues at WordFish adopted it and adapted it for women's decision making over aquaculture production in the CESA project, and we also just recently been awarded a USAID TOPS grant to adapt the manual for homestead food production. So if the original manual was mainly focused on nutrition, on food distribution within the household, now it's about women's decision making over food production, and also some wash practices. Affordable nutritious food for women, and for W, funded by GIZ and Gates. We are elaborating a food cat game, which is a power sorting exercise with the objective of identifying different types of food. So we have a food category for immunity, a food category for growth, a food category for breastfeeding women. So they have to sort the cards, the group of 4 or 5 cards out of the pile. They have to put it together, put the meal and discuss, and then they swap them around. Then we have billboards with celebrities that have particularly been chosen by the local community, showing 5 steps to good cooking, or what are the 4 nutritious foods that are available and affordable in that village, and nutritionally guided crop calendar booklets. And finally, Nurturing Connections again is being scaled up in 4 countries in Africa: Senegal, Burkina Faso, Cote d'Ivoire, Tanzania, starting next month. So adapted with the help of ICRW is going to include messages for wash and women's decision making over food production, and it will be available in the next few months in both French and English. And that's all.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. So I'm going to start by having a disclaimer that my presentation might seem a little bit out of context with what we were talking about, just because of scheduling and programming. So I'm going to try to bring it kind of to some relevance to the conversation we're having. The topic has to do with multi-stakeholder partnerships, especially with corporate and private business partnerships towards creating social change and affecting gender-based violence prevention. So I'm going to be talking about some of the experience we've had at White Ribbon in Canada around working with the corporate sector, and how we can have and create a meaningful conversation or meaningful change towards the corporate social responsibility field to create kind of like more impact and meaningful change on the ground with the communities that we're working with, rather than traditionally what's been often seen as a tokenistic kind of approach, or something that's just for show or for tax purposes. And then I'm going to try to bring it now with the practical examples of what we do, and maybe connect it and tie it to the theme of the session. So please bear with me if it sounds completely out of track and completely off at the beginning. So when we talk about corporate partnerships and global businesses, I'm going to be talking about specifically businesses, corporations, industries that are global in its scope. So transnational, globalized kind of industries, companies that mostly come from the richer Western countries, and having projects and operations in third world countries and the global south.
And the difference between that and corporations or businesses that are national and working locally is the adherence to different, or the leeways and space around the policies, laws, regulations of the country, and what kind of like frameworks they work under. So when we talk about global industries, we think of things like people were talking about the garment industries in Bangladesh in previous sessions. All these like big label clothes companies in the West that make their clothes cheaper in places like Bangladesh, the oil industry, extractive industry like mining industries. And for most of us in the non-profit field or in the activist on the ground field, we always look at that industry in an eye of suspiciousness. We look at them as there to destroy the world. Huge negative impact on the environment, depleting the natural resources, and most importantly impacting the societies and the human aspect of societies very negatively, taking advantage and exploitation of local communities. So what have we traditionally been doing as people who work in the non-profit sector all along? For the most part, we've been sitting and protesting. We're protesting the existence of these operations, we're protesting the value of having transnational businesses, and we're protesting the fact that we have very little say in how they operate. So the question is now become, what are we going to do about it? How can we, at all levels of like civic society, how are we as like non-profit organizations, NGOs, activists, governments, communities, and the businesses, how can we all work together in a meaningful way to create this world, this like more healthy living environment for all of us, without forgetting that the businesses are there to create profit and to create some kind of like an output for their industry and businesses. So how can we all understand the benefit for all of us in this and make it more meaningful and a healthier situation? So what kind of relationships do we have between local communities and these transnational businesses? You can think of any example like the garment industry, or an oil company who's working in a local community, or a mining company who's working in a local community trying to extract coal or gold or copper or any of these metals that we think about. We're all users of the products of these companies. When we talk about oil, about gold, about copper, we all use them. Every cell phone we have gold in it. Every computer have metals that are extracted from these industries in them. We all use these resources. Oil, of course, and energy runs everything that we deal with and work with. But the more direct economic impact is often overshadowed by the impact on demographics, social structures, and environment and culture. So when we look at it from our end, we're looking at the negative impact on communities, and we're not looking at the other benefits of it. And rightfully so often, because the impact is quite devastating more often than not. The impact, of course, is multifaceted. I mean, all aspects of our life: the economy, the environment, the political kind of empowerment of these local governments and local communities, and of course on a social aspect. So how does that relate to the gender conversation? How does creating a globalized economy, globalized aspects of industry, how is it impacting women and affecting the gender conversation? Once we have transformed our economy to a globalized economy, there is a more feminization of the workforces. So there's more women working in certain levels of industry and business that we haven't seen in the past. But with that, we have also a huge amount of casualization of women. The example yesterday in the garment industry in Bangladesh was a very, very good example. Like there's now all these women who are having these jobs, great, but then with that there's lots of taking advantage of these women and abuse of their circumstances. And also, when we're doing that, there's this like huge organizations in the world that are governing the global business. There's the World Trade Organization, there's the International Monetary Fund, and there's all kinds of like regional partnerships, like the North American Free Trade Agreement, Asia Pacific Agreement, and these are impacting the capacity and empowerment of the local communities and governments in creating their own policies and making their own decisions about the livelihood of their community. So the bigger this kind of like umbrellas of relationship is happening in the world, the less ownership the local communities are having a say into their own livelihood. In 2004, the United Nations started this process, this conversation. Some of you, I'm sure, are very aware of it, of creating this guiding principles on global business and doing business in local communities. And that process took 7 years to be written and finalized because of all the politics that was involved in it. So 2011 is when the document finally was finalized and released around the guiding principles of business and human rights. And one of the three of the main general principles that I pulled out of that document that might be relevant today are: one, the obligation of the state in protecting human rights. When they are dealing with global businesses, with corporations, there's an obligation of the state itself to protect the human rights. The businesses have a role in maintaining and respecting the human rights of the population they work with. And there's a need to create a remedy process. Once these violations, once these principles are not adhered to, there needs to be a remedy process that's created to respond to that situation. So if you focus on that middle one, the role of the businesses in respecting human rights, with that there's three main points that we need to look at. So one, as simple as the businesses should respect human rights. They should avoid infringing with the human rights of the others and should address adverse human rights impacts with which they are involved. And when we're talking about these human rights, we're talking about universally acknowledged human rights. We're not talking about the businesses coming and setting their own kind of framework, saying, okay, this is what we think are the rights of local populations are, and this is what we're going to be adhering for. There are international and global recognized kind of frameworks and guidelines that they need to adhere to. And in order to meet their responsibilities, they need to create a framework that is adhering to the international human rights. They need to create policies and procedures that are clear out there, that they are held accountable and responsible for, and that people, the stakeholders, can know and can make reference to when they have any arbitration. So, what's been happening in the last number of years, many years, is that there's a bit of a paradigm shift. So when we started talking about that conversation of 2004 in that document, there was some resistance. There's some issues around corporations, businesses wanted to participate in the conversation because it's an investment. It's too much money, it's too much responsibility, too much work for them. And now we are seeing more businesses doing it because they understand that it's good for business. Not just because they are ashamed in doing the right thing, not because they can get tax breaks only for that, not because they're just can create a good advertisement and promotion for business, but they are actually realizing that it's good for business to have good practices that respect local communities' human rights. So I'm going to run through this a bit fast because I only have 5 minutes left. So what are we doing? I'm going to go to the examples of how we are doing it on the ground, and this might be a little bit relevant to the conversation we were having before. It's the different approaches and strategies of creating change on the ground with the support of a corporate partnership, with a private business that's kind of understanding the reality and the necessity of engaging the community, investing in the community. So we have a project. We are based in Toronto, in Canada, and we have a project that's multi-regional in the world and multi-stakeholder. One of the locations we're dealing with, they're very different locations. So we're starting from somewhere in North America, in Nevada in the U.S., to Zambia in Africa, and to Papua New Guinea in Asia-Pacific area. And these are very different, diverse kind of populations in terms of development, in terms of the communities we're working with, in terms of the realities of the problem and the violent situation in these areas. So I'm going to talk about the Zambia example. So when we went to Zambia and worked around in a rural area around where this business operates, we found out that almost everybody is starting to talk about that one of the main causes of violence and problems at the household and relationship between the partners, the husband and wife, or the male and female partners, is not figuring it out, not understanding how to deal with their finances. So these are young kids who are 19, 18 years old, suddenly going in a really good job in a mine and having an income that nobody in the country has ever dreamed of at that age, without much education, without much understanding how to manage money and finances. And suddenly, they're going home with all this money and not knowing what to do with it and manage it. They get their bonuses, they go out to the next village, they spend all of it on alcohol and sex work. And they come home, their wife, kids, there's no money for food, there's no money for education, there's no money for clothes. Fights happen and problems happen. So they we realized that there's an issue there that's beyond just the problem itself of what the violence that's happening at the household, from a structural impact of how the structure of the business impacting their life in that community. So what we've done, we've designed the financial literacy training, but we also made sure that we introduce a gender lens and a gender perspective into it. So we worked with local consultants who are like having a good long experience of working locally in Zambia, and the local consultant from there who works in financial literacy, and we worked on them to develop the curriculum, the content of that training to include a gender lens. And we started to do it with the employees of the company, and now the next step is to expand it to the local communities. In Nevada and the U.S., we're working with the big Aboriginal communities, with Native communities, and that community had a history, like a very difficult history of colonization, of oppression, of a difficult relationship with the Western or with the Caucasian population there. It also resulted in lots of social issues and problems. Violence rates are very high in the families and among each other. And when we went and talked to them, we realized that they never talked about the story. There was never a conversation about how to deal with the problem, or how to even talk about it, to acknowledge that it exists. They all know it exists, but they never talked about it. We talked to elders there, to people who have cultural references and history, and realized that their history and culture have lots of great kind of stories around the value of women in the society, the respect of each other, the respect of elders to young people, which is never talked about anymore. So what we created is these forums where people would bring hundreds of people from the community and help them design the curriculum for that forum, to start having conversations, to start talking about this issue, to have elders who have never spoke publicly in front of the whole community come and start talking about their own story of abuse, of abusing others, and of regret and shame and repentance. Do you have people like an old elder man in the Native community who's standing there and crying in front of the whole community for the first time ever? That started a movement that was amazing to witness and see, and that's excitement and enthusiasm to keep the momentum going. The business partner we have there kept saying that this is the first time we start having a relationship with this community that is respectful, that they want to come and work with us and talk to us, because now they realize the impact of this partnership that we're having, our organization and them, and how we are impacting their lives and how they are appreciating that. So now the relationship between them are getting much better, and everybody's like getting the benefits out of it. It's going to be a long process, of course. Problems are not solved, but it's a really, really good start, and we're still going on with it. We're working with youth, talking about sustainability and leaving a legacy. We're helping develop curriculums through their anti-bullying mandates to talk about to introduce the gender lens in the issue of anti-bullying, of the relationship between boys and girls and men and women. And that curriculum, once it's done, once it's piloted, evaluated, we're going to spread it out in all the schools of the region, and we're going to, once we go on leave, we're going to leave that behind as a legacy, as something, a tool for the community to work with. We're working with communities. Some of you might have heard, might not actually, of something called the Walk a Mile in Her Shoes, that the White Ribbon Campaign organized, different white ribbons organized in different parts of the world. And that's an event where men in high heels go down and walk in public places, like for a mile, showing support for women, for victims of violence. So that's something we usually do in our experience in Toronto. We do it in the big city, in a big urban place where there's lots of acceptance of differences and different ways of doing things. But we went there to this small rural community in northern Nevada with very strong, solid kind of sense of masculinity, and worked with the miners and with the police force and with the sports leagues and asked them if they would do it, and they were all very happy to do it, and they're all very excited to come and do this event that's creating conversations until now that's changing lots of the narrative of their relationships with each other. And the last approach that we're working with now is in Papua New Guinea, where we go to the mountains of Papua New Guinea, where areas that are literally the end of the highway. It's not even a highway, it's a small road this big. And the end of it, where it stops and nothing else happens after. There's mountains, people living around there. There's no real urban centers. There's just people living in the mountains. small towns and villages, and then there's this business operation there. We didn't know where to start when we went there because there was no local organization that's happening. There was no civic society institutions and organizations. So there, what we did is now we're starting to work with them to create that infrastructure, to create that like context of organization for something to build on and to start with. So basically, what else I'm ending here, looking at this, like going to different locales, different kind of like parts of the world and different communities, and trying to understand what's going on there, what's the need of us. There's no one-size-fits-all for this work. Although we are working with the same company that's sending us to all these different locations, they might have been actually happy if we present this one model, create this work plan, and they can say, let's go and apply it everywhere. But that wasn't the right way to do it. And because we were very mindful of customizing it to the reality of every locale every local situation where we're going, we are seeing a result and a response to it from the community and from the company itself that is overwhelmingly positive. And that's saying that finally we're having these meaningful relationship conversations. People want to work more in the mine and be more productive in it, and understanding the safety of their community. So this is very multi-stakeholders. It is all of our business to get involved in it. You know, we are in the nonprofit sector. We're working with the local communities and organizations. We are working with the business. We are working with the people on the ground, the victims, and the people influenced with from the social situation. And we all need to understand our relations to each other and appreciate it, at least in our view, to make it a better world for everybody. Thank you.
No, I will only do in Oh, yeah. We need some help in this. ये जरा power हाँ, light has power गेली त्याच्यामुळे ते fire दिल्यामुळे. Excuse me. Yeah.
Should I take it out?
Yeah.
You sure?
हम दोनों बाहर निकलते फिर आप करें.
You want it or not?
I think that somebody put their foot on
the line.
The lights have gone. PowerPoint.
Oh dear.
Yeah. It will take time. She can.
We can take some questions.
Sorry?
While we're waiting, we can take
question answer. Can we take question answer till he picks for the other three panelists? You know, till the time we.
मैं शुरू करूँ मेरे पास है.
कि रुको क्या आपका से?
Setting ना so and this is slides I better to use the PowerPoint. 5 minutes of quick.
Sure. Oh, you're there. Okay, great. Thanks, thanks, this is great. And I've been following the Young Lives work for a while now. I'm very interested. One thing I don't know if you know about this, but you know, in the Young Lives module there was a domestic violence module early on. But it was kind of interesting, and in my view, it was a bit poorly designed. But it was because this was well before the World Health Organization study came out. But it asked about, if I remember right, whether a woman had been abused or whether her husband used alcohol, and then if he used alcohol, whether he had beaten her. So I thought it conditioned, you know, in other words, abuse to alcohol use. But I was just still wondering, even despite the limitations, if this is being used, because Young Lives is the only longitudinal study I know of outside of the U.S. or outside of high-income countries that includes domestic violence and then children's later outcome. And then I just had a question for Dawashala. I'm sorry, did I pronounce it?
No,
sorry,
Ramona.
this confused me, Ramona.
Ramona.
Yeah, the findings you presented are pretty interesting in terms of men being so important in families and nutrition decisions, which actually kind of runs counter to a lot of the data and results that we have regarding women's role in nutrition and information and their use of income more than men's to supplement nutrition outcomes. So I was just wondering, why you think that influence exists. If you could unpackage what that influence means a little bit. Sorry, my name's Matt, and I'm with the World Bank.
Okay.
Yeah.
You want me to go first? Or do you want to take more questions?
No, is this on, because...
No, he's trying.
Are we taking more questions?
Okay.
Yeah, take more questions. Take more questions. Can I?
Yeah, maybe one or two questions on these.
Okay, can I just say?
Yeah.
No, I want to ask Suhail.
Introduce.
I'm Dr. Neena Shiva, and I'm with Initiative for Health and Equity in Society, but also the People's Health Movement, Right to Food and Women's Movement. No, because I think you're amongst the very few who even mentioned WTO and some of these unjust international trade regimes, which are increasing poverty and disparities and creating a situation where conflicts are going to be more. And when people are in that situation, then they see the enemy as their neighbor, not somebody far away. So, like some of the agreements that you mentioned, the TPP and the TP, and there is investor-state dispute settlement agreement, which they're trying to put in everything, where the investor, the corporations will have more rights than the state. So the state, even to protect their people for public health, public interest, that they are going to be taken to dispute settlement or arbitration or outside their country. So now some horrible things like that are on the horizon. And unless some of these things they say no, this is for public citizens, especially, and for Global South again, for poor in the north, and majority poor in the south, that this is going to be terrible. That I think it should be put up front. And one of the things that you had said about corporates and human rights was about them getting justice. If we could not get justice after 30 years for the Bhopal gas leaking, again I'm repeating it, they are sitting in Jantar Mantar, which is equal to a Hyde Park, and without food, many of them are not drinking water. Some of them are having ketosis, the ketone bodies in it. So the deafness and the society's pregnant silence on these issues of justice, very, very terrifying. Because the whole gender justice being pitting one gender against the other, and these larger which are actually destroying societies, communities, homes, and any sense of care, concern, compassion. I'm sure those words have gone out of the dialogue, of even the conversation, and the whole issue of justice. So I'm grateful you brought it up, but I want to say, because there are certain technology we are very scared of, with big corporation, intellectual property rights, etc., GM technologies, where in the name of food, and the health hazards related to genetically modified food, pregnant silence, and they're going to be pushed with aid, so, and many hazardous things are going to be pushed to the south, and the liability clause removed. So I just wanted to say your take on that.
I just wanted to ask you the related question that you said there is a UN's human rights finally agreed by 2011. But how many countries have signed kind of that charter? Because we would like to know if India has also signed it or not.
But even if it's signed,
However, that is one thing to be done.
it's signed.
Just a comment and a question. I'm really excited to hear your presentation. I'm working with CARE in Ethiopia, and we have a very similar feeder-funded nutrition project. We have a very similar methodology to you, but the comment is I'm so excited to hear someone say about mother-in-law. So in Ethiopia, we've been talking about men engagement and all this kind of stuff in CARE Ethiopia, and I have been feeding back to our gender advisors in head office that it's not just about men engagement. We're going to have an impact on issues around sexual reproductive health, around child marriage, and around nutrition. Then we need to be talking about mother-in-laws, because they are a key gatekeeper, equal to man. and nobody has talked about it except for you in the sessions I've attended. So that is exciting. And the second one is in relation to measurement, and I think this comes back to Matt's point. We are definitely seeing that engagement of mother-in-laws and men are a significant factor in increasing household food security and improvement in nutrition. There's a direct correlation to it, but how are we measuring that? So I would be very interested to see how you're measuring it, because we are struggling very much in trying to measure these issues of behavior change, and the methodologies that we're using are very soft, kind of like the games and similar to you, sort of the whole reflection action methodology. But how are we measuring it? And I've asked a number of people this week, and everyone has basically responded saying we're finding it difficult. And Matt's question around, did you use a comparison group? No, you didn't. But also in Ethiopia, it's very difficult to use random control trials to get ethical clearance for those kind of things. Yeah. So how are we better measuring that kind of issue and changes in household dynamics? I'd be really interested.
You want to answer?
Yeah,
let's finish the presentation. Yeah. So her presentation, even the PowerPoint slides are in Hindi, but we will try to understand the gist in English. Finish. This is a very interesting project in Maharashtra, the state of Maharashtra, with 3 districts and 5 organizations coming together to run that project. What is that project? Name?
नमस्ते। ऐसी आदत है तो हमें है लाइट जाने की। गांव में 10-10 घंटे तक लाइट जाता है तो हम एडजस्ट करते हैं। मेरा नाम है दैवशाला गिरी। मैं समझदार जोड़ीदार प्रकल्प के साथ मेंटर के रूप में जुड़ी हुई हूँ, जो प्रकल्प स्त्री पुरुष समानता में पुरुषों की भागीदारी बनाने में काम करता है।
The name of the project called Samajhdar Jodidar, which means a couple who is understanding. Now, very interestingly, even though the name given is Jodidar, which is couple, we understand it to be a husband-wife. But here the word couple is used in a broader sense, which will include any one of the opposite sex, like a relationship between a mother and a son, relationship between a sister and a brother. So anything of the opposite, in that sense how they are an understanding couple. So in that sense the word couple is used, so that's the name given.
समझदार जोड़ीदार प्रकल्प 2010 से सेंटर फॉर हेल्थ एंड सोशल जस्टिस और UNFPA के द्वारा संयुक्त रूप में महाराष्ट्र में भारत के अंदर महाराष्ट्र में चलाया जा रहा है। इसमें महाराष्ट्र की 5 संस्थाएं शामिल है। युवाग्राम के सावित्रीबाई फुले महिला मंडल बीड, हेलो मेडिकल फाउंडेशन सोलापुर, अस्तित्व ट्रस्ट सांगोला, नारी समता मंच पुणे। यह प्रकल्प पिछले 4.5 साल से महाराष्ट्र के अंदर इन 5 संस्थाओं के साथ चलाया जा रहा है। महाराष्ट्र राज्य में समझदार जोड़ीदार प्रकल्प इन संस्थाओं के साथ बीड, पुणे और सोलापुर इन 3 जिलों में चलाया जा रहा है। इस प्रकल्प के उद्देश्य महिलाओं पर होने वाली सभी प्रकार की हिंसाओं को कम करना, महिलाओं के प्रजनन स्वास्थ्य में पुरुषों का सहभाग बढ़ाना, परिवार और गांव स्तर पर महिलाओं का निर्णय प्रक्रिया में सहभाग बढ़ाना, पारिवारिक स्तर पर पालकत्व और जोड़ीदार के जिम्मेदारी के संदर्भ में लिंग आधारित भेदभाव को कम करना, स्त्री पुरुष समानता, महिलाओं पर होने वाले हिंसा, इन मुद्दों के बारे में पुरुष और युवाओं का ज्ञान बढ़ाना, उनके दृष्टिकोण में बदलाव लाकर उनकी प्रवृत्ति और व्यवहार में बदलाव लाना। NRHM के अंतर्गत प्रजनन स्वास्थ्य देखभाल सेवाओं के अंतर्गत सार्वजनिक सुविधा में पुरुषों की भागीदारी, इन सुविधाओं के उपयोग को बढ़ाना, जिसमें स्थानीय स्वास्थ्य सेवा प्रदाताओं के साथ संवाद बढ़ाना भी शामिल था। अभी इस प्रकल्प का कार्य क्षेत्र है युवाग्राम के 20 गांव, सावित्रीबाई फुले महिला मंडल बीड के 20 गांव, नारी समता मंच के 20 गांव, अस्तित्व ट्रस्ट के 20 गांव और
I'm wondering if you could pause
हेलो मेडिकल फाउंडेशन के 20 गांव। ऐसे इन 3 जिलों में 5 संस्थाओं के अंदर 100 गांव में इस प्रकल्प को चलाया जा रहा है?
Basically, it's around 5 organizations which are implementing the project in collaboration with the CHSG and UNFPA. They have funded it for Maharashtra, and the 5 organizations are reaching out to 20 villages each. So totally 100 villages in 3 districts. But 5 organizations are running it.
इस 5 संस्थाओं में से आज जो मैं आपके साथ बात करने वाली हूँ, जो मैं मेंटर करके इसमें रोल निभा रही हूँ, मैं 2 संस्थाओं के साथ मेंटरशिप, एक के साथ अभी नहीं चला रही हूँ लेकिन एक के साथ चल रही हूँ। तो जो संस्था के साथ मैं मेंटरशिप निभा रही हूँ वो है युवाग्राम, जिसमें इस प्रकल्प के अंदर प्रकल्प संचालक है देशमुख जी, देवशाला मेंटर, और 2 फैसिलिटेटर होते हैं जो 10-10 गांव को फैसिलिटेट करते हैं। और ये जो भी प्राथमिक आरोग्य केंद्र होता है उसके अंतर्गत 10-10 गांव को चुना है, और इन 10 गांवों में एक लीडर चुना है जिसको हम एनिमेटर कहते हैं, और ये एनिमेटर प्रशिक्षण लेके गांव के गुटों के साथ काम करते हैं। गुट की प्रोसेस में बाद में बताऊंगी।
Basically, here she is telling that the structure they have created for that project, there will be a project folder and there will be mentor. One mentor is assigned to organization, and there will be some facilitators. Two facilitators they will work with, and Prerak speaking.
One animator in each village.
One animator. So these are the 3 areas. And she's telling normally when you use the word mentor, like a youth mentor, we have a different. Here the mentor is for the programs in a wider sense. For the entire program in those 2 districts, she herself is a presenter, she is a mentor also for that project.
ये मेंटरशिप की कल्पना इस प्रोजेक्ट में बहुत अनोखी और अलग थी। तो मेंटरशिप क्या है? मेंटरशिप का मतलब है फ्रेंड, फिलोसोफर एंड गाइड। प्रकल्प का लक्ष्य तय करना और कार्यकर्ताओं में उसकी समझ बढ़ाना, कार्यकर्ताओं और फैसिलिटेटर में जेंडर, मर्दानगी और प्रजनन स्वास्थ्य पर आधारित मूल्यों की नई संकल्पना की समझ निर्माण करना, गांव के समूह और एनिमेटर के जरूरतों को समझकर उनकी क्षमता बनाना, एनिमेटर और गांव के युवक और पुरुषों की समझ तैयार करने के लिए प्रशिक्षक संबंधी साहित्य और मॉड्यूल्स तैयार करना, तांत्रिक आधार प्रदान करना, ट्रेनिंग, अभियान, नियोजन, सपोर्ट आदि। गांव स्तर पर तान तनाव का क्षेत्र या संघर्ष निर्माण हो रहा हो तो उसका निर्मूलन करना, गांव स्तर पर होने वाले अनेक गतिविधियों का विश्लेषण करना और उसमें से क्या सीखे उसकी समझ बढ़ाने में मदद करना, गांव स्तर पर किए जाने वाले कार्य और निरीक्षण का सविस्तर रिपोर्ट देना। तो मेंटरशिप के अंदर इतना आता था जो हमने कभी उसके पहले ज्यादा सोचा नहीं था इस पर। हम ट्रेनर थे तो ट्रेनिंग करते थे, निकल आते तो पीछे मुड़कर देखते भी नहीं थे, लेकिन यहाँ बहुत जिम्मेदारी हमारी बड़ी थी। मेंटरशिप समझने के लिए हमें 1 साल लगा, बहुत मुश्किलें आई, लेकिन अभी खुद को ही हम मेंटर मानते हैं। तो शायद मेरे कुछ कहानियों के साथ में मैं जो भी यहाँ बात करूंगी अभी, इसमें मैं मेंटरशिप का मेरा सफर और कहानियां बताने वाली हूँ। कोई भी संख्यात्मक बात मैं यहाँ नहीं करने वाली, गुणात्मक बात रखने वाली हूँ, लेकिन मैं दोनों साथ कर जुड़ कर जाऊंगी कि टाइम ज्यादा ना लगे।
She wants to quickly tell that as a mentor, what at a personal level, what was the connection, and also at the project level. So we'll quickly go through.
मेंटरशिप का चुनाव के लिए जो मेंटर इसमें है वो स्त्रीवादी दृष्टिकोण से काम करने वाले और मूवमेंट के साथ जुड़े हुए हैं, और जो जेंडर आधारित अलग अलग विषयों पर काम गए 20-25 साल से कर रहे हैं, और हक आधारित राइट बेस्ड दृष्टिकोण से काम करने वाले मेंटर इसके अंदर जुड़े हुए हैं। और मेंटरशिप लेने का मेरा क्या मकसद था वो बहुत मुझे मेरी निजी जिंदगी में महत्वपूर्ण लगता है। अभी जिस इलाके में ये प्रकल्प चल रहा है उस इलाके की मैं रहने वाली थी, लेकिन जो मेरी थोड़ी कहानी बताई उन्होंने, तो मुझे घर से 5 लोगों ने जानवर जैसे मारकर घर के बाहर निकाला था, और वो मेरा खून करने के लिए, तो मैं 14 साल अंडरग्राउंड यानी उनको मैं मिली नहीं थी। तो मुझे इस एरिया में जाकर इन पुरुषों की सोच में बहुत अच्छे से समझ सकती थी। तो मुझे एक मौका था कि इस इलाके में मैं जाऊं और कोई भी पूर्वग्रह पहला ऐसा दृष्टिकोण ना लेते हुए कि मर्द ऐसे होते हैं, तो मेरी भी एक समझ 20-25 सालों में बनी थी। तो मुझे लगा कि मैं अपने मर्दों के साथ, अपने धरती के साथ जाकर मैं इन बातों को रोकूं और उनके साथ एक नया रिश्ता बनाने की मैं कोशिश करूं। और मेंटरशिप मैंने 2 संस्थाओं के साथ की है, सावित्रीबाई फुले महिला मंडल, इतना पूरा करती हूँ, और युवाग्राम केज एक 3 साल तक किए, एक 3.5 साल तक 2 संस्थाओं के साथ में जुड़ी हूँ।
Actually, she made a very powerful statement just now, which was related to personal, and that was like earlier I said that she was teaching in a school, and because she expressed her likingness for a man, she was removed. She was asked to leave because she had given a bad name. And after that, her own family disowned her, and that place, her own family, the village where she was born and brought up, is somewhere nearby to the place where she is currently working as a mentor. So she feels after a gap of 15-20 years, after which she was removed forcibly to move out of her village, she is going back again to the same community and trying to talk to the men, understand them, and also in a way like reflecting her background, and she wants to connect them and tell that men can also change.
हमारी प्रकल्प की जो शुरुआत रही वो जो गांव के प्रेरक चुने थे, जिनको हम एनिमेटर कहते हैं, तो उन्हें हम प्रशिक्षण देते थे। तो हमारे लिए मेंटरशिप पहले साल काफी दिक्कत वाली बात थी कि हम लाइन पे चल रहे कि नहीं। तो जैसे हम ट्रेनिंग करते थे, उनके साथ बात करते, तो उनसे ही हमको टटोलते थे। एक पहला ट्रेनिंग मैंने जो किया उनके साथ, तो बहुत गांव में से लड़के चुने गए थे जिनको कुछ काम नहीं था, चलो 1000 रुपया मानधन मिलने वाला, ऐसे सोचकर जो आए थे, और ऐसे सोच के आए थे कि वहां जाकर तो मुझे कुछ समझने वाला नहीं है, हाँ तो भी जाके सुनते हैं, ऐसे सोचकर वो आए थे। और स्त्री पुरुष समानता तो कहाँ होने वाली है ही नहीं है, ये सोचकर जो आकर बैठे थे। पहले 3 दिन तक उन्होंने काफी मुझे तकलीफ दी, और जैसे कि मजाक, ये तो क्या होने वाला नहीं है, लेकिन हम तो बैठे सुनाइए, ऐसी वो बात थी। लेकिन जैसे ही 5 दिन का ट्रेनिंग खत्म हुआ, तो 4-5वें दिन में मुझे बहुत अलगपन महसूस हुआ, और आखिरी दिन उन्होंने अपने दिल से कहा कि मैडम हम तो ऐसे सोच के आए थे, लेकिन अभी हमको लग रहा है कि कुछ हमें जमने वाला है। ऐसे ट्रेनिंग चल रहे थे, तो एक कहानी सुनने को मिली। हमारा एक बाला साहेब करके एनिमेटर है, जो ऐसे सोच के आया था कि मुझे कुछ समझने वाला नहीं है। तो एक दिन वो होटल में गया, तो वो चाय पी रहा था, तो ट्रांसजेंडर 4 लोग वहां आ गए और पानी पीना उन्होंने लिया पानी का, तो वो होटल वाले ने उनको भगाया। तो वो उठ के चला गया और उनको वापस लेके आया, और वो बोला मेरे साथ है ये, और वो अंदर लेके उनको चाय पिलाया, गपशप की, और जैसे वो गए तो होटल वाले के पास गया और कहा क्यों भगाया तुमने, वो इंसान नहीं है क्या? तो मुझे पता चला कि जिसको लग रहा था कि मुझे समझ में नहीं आएगा, वो सब समझ गया है। तो हमारी मेंटरशिप लाइन पे है, ये हमें बहुत समझ में आ रहा था। इनसे हम समझते थे कि ये कैसे हो रहा है, उसमें से एक मूल्यांकन करना, वो भी समझ हमारी ज्यादा बढ़ी। अभी
Yeah, like let us say the essence what basically she's trying that mentorship gave a lot of joy the work which she was doing. Like those who are animators inducted, they were very much hesitant, and after 5-day training they thought this is boring, this is not at all connected to my life. But actually in the real life, when she witnessed, without them knowing that she is witnessing that one of them intervened when there were 4 transgenders while going to have tea. Like those were hushed, they were asked to go away, the transgender, and she found surprisingly that one of the animator intervened and talked to the shopkeeper that why did you whisk them away. So she felt that if they were feeling bored and if they didn't like the workshop, they wouldn't have done. So they got whatever the essence was of the 4-day training.
जैसे ही हमारे गुट बनाए थे, तो फिर ये एनिमेटर जाके गुटों में प्रशिक्षण देते थे, लेकिन इनको बहुत सपोर्ट नहीं मिल रहा था गांव में से। तो हमने कई अभियान का भी गांव में आयोजन किया। हर साल में हम 15 दिन का अभियान चलाते हैं। पहले साल में लोगों को हमें बुलाना पड़ा, दूसरी साल में वो गए साल आए थे वो आए हैं, और तीसरी साल उनको पता चला कि अभी कुछ ना कुछ यहाँ मिलने वाला है। तो 10 मिनट में पूरा गांव इकट्ठा होता था, और बच्चों से लेकर औरतों से लेकर और एनिमेटर से लेकर पूरे पुरुषों से के साथ। तो ये भी एक बहुत अच्छा सफर रहा कि गांव में फैलाने के लिए इन चीजों के लिए अभियान की बहुत हमें मदद हुई है.
In fact, you might be knowing that the 16 days of activism, 25th November till the 10th of December, and this project is running for more than 4 years now. So she's saying that those who came for the first year found something different, and so they did come for the second and third year with a different set of expectations.
फिर हम थोड़ा बड़ा दायरा हमने बढ़ाया कि गांव में तो ये फैल गया, लेकिन ये 100 गांव बहुत अलग अलग होते थे, और जब भी वो कुछ करते थे तो जब भी घर में काम करना शुरू किया तो गांव वाले की रोक टोक शुरू हो गई, तो उन्हें बहुत ऐसे लगता था कि हम कुछ बिगड़ रहे हैं क्या, और जितना ज्यादा बदलने की कोशिश कर रहे थे तो फिर तो बोलते तो ये तो एड़ा हो गया है, तो ये तो इसीलिए हमें लगा कि नहीं, इसका शेयरिंग होना और इनके साथ बात होना बहुत जरूरी है. एक हर साल हम अधिवेशन करते जहाँ सभी 100 गांव के लोग आकर आदान प्रदान करते और उनका वहाँ सत्कार करना और उनकी कहानियां एक दूसरे को शेयर करना, तो उनका हौसला उसमें से बहुत बढ़ता है. तो ये पिक्चर्स है वो अधिवेशन के है.
Basically, it was an annual gathering of all the villagers, and you could see that here using cultural advocacy and
ये सामूहिक बैठक का चित्र है गांव के. गांव में हमने 2 गुट बनाए थे, एक विवाहित पुरुषों का और एक अविवाहित युवकों का. वैसे दोनों युवक है हमारे लिए, लेकिन ये गुटों में जब हम काम करना जाते थे तो बहुत बार मैं मेंटर करके उनको सपोर्ट करने के लिए जाती थी. चित्र में एक वहाँ बैठे हैं जिनकी उम्र थोड़ी 50 से थोड़ी आगे है, तो वहाँ सत्र था कि प्रेगनेंसी में पुरुषों की क्या भागीदारी होनी चाहिए और डिलीवरी में बीवी के साथ. तो वो वहाँ बैठे थे, तो हमारे एनिमेटर बोले आप बाहर जाइए. हाँ, तो मैंने कहा बैठे तो बैठने दीजिए, और वो बहुत खुश हो गए कि यार क्या होने वाला है, सुनने को मिलेगा. तो वहाँ पूरा वो सत्र होने के बाद मैंने उनको पूछा कि क्या समझ में आया, क्या आपको कुछ समझ में आया, तो फायदा हुआ कुछ. तो बोले क्यों नहीं, बहुत फायदा हुआ. तो मैं बोली क्या फायदा हुआ, तो बोले हमारे टाइम तो ये किसी ने समझाया नहीं था, अभी मैं मेरे बहू को पूछूंगा तो शाम को कि तूने कैल्शियम की गोली ली है क्या. तो ये बहुत एक अलग से अनुभव मुझे मिले कि हम एक ग्रुप को देख रहे थे, लेकिन वहाँ सिर्फ ग्रुप लेने के लिए नहीं बैठता था, पूरे गांव के लोग जुट जाते थे. मीटिंग भी होती थी तो थोड़े लोग मीटिंग ग्रुप के होते थे और 10, 15, 20 ग्रुप के बाहर, तो हमको ग्रुप भी तय करने में तो ग्रुप हमारा 20 का 100, 200, 400 तक भी बढ़ गया.
Understanding couple project is for 2 kinds of groups. One is the unmarried and the other is married. So that is fine. I think let us quickly.
हाँ, ये 2 पिक्चर्स है जो हमको मोटिवेट करने के लिए उनको हम उनके सत्कार करते थे, जैसे गजरा लगाना, उनका दोनों का सत्कार करना. ये जो बाजू में ये जोड़ी है जिनको शाल डाली है, उनका एक मैं किस्सा छोटा सा बताना चाहती हूँ. जब उनको बॉडी लिटरेसी का ट्रेनिंग दिया तो उसी रात को इस आदमी ने अपने बीबी को कहा कि ये सेक्सुअल पार्ट को ये नाम होते हैं. तो एकदम चौंक गई कि आदमी आज एकदम ऐसे बोलने कैसे लगा ना, और बात भी नहीं करता था. तो उसने पूछा कि तुमको ये किसने समझाया, किससे बात की, क्योंकि वो ग्रुप कर पुरुष बात करते, तुम्हें आज ये जानकारी कहाँ से मिली. तो बोले वो हमारे यहाँ मैडम आते ना, उन्हें दी, ये बाई ने दी. तो ये जो शॉकिंग था उनके, तो वो आदमी ने अपने बीवी को ये कहा कि हमें ही लगता है कि हमें सब जानकारी होती है, लेकिन हमसे ज्यादा जानकारी औरतों को भी होती है. तो ये बहुत एक मजे का किस्सा था. हाँ ठीक है. थोड़ा सा हम फिल्म का भी इस्तेमाल काफी हमने उसके अंदर किया है. अब इसकी कहानियां बताने के लिए मेरे पास टाइम नहीं है. और ये ग्राम पंचायत सदस्यों का प्रशिक्षण एक महत्वपूर्ण टप्पा हमारे यहाँ रहा है ग्राम पंचायत के साथ. बहुत हमने कोशिश की थी कि उनके साथ जेंडर सेंसिटाइजेशन का ट्रेनिंग करें, लेकिन कम से कम 3 साल लगे हमें उनसे बात करने के लिए. आखिर में ट्रेनिंग लग गया तो 100-150 तो वहाँ थे. तो मैं वहाँ का एक किस्सा शेयर जरूर करूंगी. ठीक है.
Self-governing bodies. We know bodies which are at the state level and the national level. So the local self-governing in that village to mobilize them and have a gender sensitization program, it took 3 years. The project is completed more than 4 years, but in the earlier years, even if they attempted, they couldn't. But after 3rd year, they have.
इसलिए शॉर्ट बताती हूँ इसमें.
Maybe they have seen the results on the youth in their own families till then, and that must have encouraged.
इनको जेंडर सेंसिटाइजेशन की क्यों जरूरत है, तो यहाँ का एक छोटा किस्सा बताती हूँ मैं. बार ये थोड़ा है आरक्षण का संरक्षण अभियान. ये पूरा मराठा समाज के साथ में जो अभी युवाग्राम के साथ कर रही हूँ, पूरा मराठा समाज है. और हमारे संस्था प्रमुख से लेकर एनिमेटर से लेकर ये पूरे ये उच्च जाति के और जमींदार लोग हैं. तो ये पहले आरक्षण के लिए बहुत झगड़ा करते थे, इतना डिबेट होता था, 6 महीने तक तो इस पर डिबेट चल रहा था. और जो लोगों ने आरक्षण के ये क्यों दिया है इस पर जो डिबेट कर रहे थे, उन्होंने 3 साल के बाद महिलाओं के बस में जो सीट के आरक्षण होते हैं उस पर 8 मार्च को एक बहुत बढ़िया अभियान चलाया था. और पूरे बस स्थानक पे मर्दों को जाकर कहते थे कि ये सीट क्यों रखे हैं, क्यों खाली करके देना है, हम इसके बारे में सोचते नहीं. तो एक बहुत अलग सा वो एक दृश्य था.
Basically, 80% of the members of the community where the project is being run belong to a little higher caste, in the hierarchy, and they were not in favor of affirmative action in any way. So it was interesting that these very villagers who were opposing to these things, they later on started telling, you might be knowing that in bus transport you have certain buses which were reserved for women. Considering lactating women as well as stopping the abuse where the women have a right to sit. So they started encouraging and spreading the word that women need to be given a space to sit. So that is very interesting, that a community which is feudal mindset where no reservations at all.
ये थोड़े प्रशिक्षण के साहित्य अभी इस पर मैं बात नहीं करती हूँ. आगे 9 गाँव में लड़कियों के लिए खेल के मैदान आरक्षित किए गए जहाँ लड़कियां जाकर सुरक्षित खेल पाए. जब
प्लेग्राउंड स्पेशली फॉर गर्ल्स as a result of the project have been earmarked that these playgrounds will be for girls. So they succeeded in that.
और ये जो पिक्चर है ये सांप सीढ़ी का है जिसमें बाजू में पुरुष तो खेल रहे हैं लेकिन लड़के लोग हैं.
अपन नेक्स्ट स्लाइड्स आहेत बताइए अजून
नहीं संपले.
So this is in short like what even in temples women are are allowed to enter, which is a big taboo in some places. Women are not allowed. So a separate bus for girls, which is an interesting thing that the village temples have come ahead and a bus is there to make them travel to school.
यहाँ 70% गाँव में घर पर पत्नी का नाम लगा है.
This is very interesting that
70% 100 गाँव में के अंदर से
they have put the name of the wife in the name of the house. Like the household name is in the name equally with both the titles. Yeah.
ये घर में पुरुषों के काम की भागीदारी का है.
Actually, there is a law very recently in Maharashtra and state. There is a law but it was not followed.
जाओ आगे. ये स्कूल जाने वाले लड़कियों की संख्या बढ़ी. इसमें एक बहुत बात है जो मैं इसको एक ही चीज इसमें मैं बताती हूँ और आगे जाती हूँ. एक गांव में लड़कियां स्कूल में नहीं जाती थी 7वीं के बाद, तो उन्होंने बस चालू की जाके और बस से अभी लड़कियां स्कूल में जाती है. ठीक है, चलो बहुत है लेकिन अभी खत्म करते हैं. सिर्फ लास्ट वाला चित्र देखना. जो हम मेले में गेम खेलते थे तो हमने बोला अपने अपने समझदार जोड़ीदार जोड़ी को लेके आओ, तो ये जोड़ियां बनी वहाँ जो हमने कहीं भी नहीं थी. वो लास्ट वाली जोड़ी है बाप और बेटी की, वो दूसरी पति पत्नी की है, तीसरी एनिमेटर और स्टाफ जो युवाग्राम का है उसकी है, और ये फिर पति पत्नी और माँ बेटी. तो उन्होंने अपनी जोड़ियां बनाई थी. हाइट के हिसाब से हमें लगेगा कि जिनकी हाइट बराबर है जीते, लेकिन ऐसा नहीं था. वो बेटी वाला बाप वाला जीता था क्योंकि वो बहुत एक दूसरे से उनका अच्छा कम्युनिकेशन था. और ये है वहाँ का टीम जिन्होंने 5 साल में काफी बदलाव किए हैं. शायद मुझे मौका मिला और कोई मुझे बोलेगा कहानी लिखो तो मैं अगले 5 साल तक ये कहानियां लिखती रहूंगी.
So I think we'll end here. Any last remarks? I think 1 or 2 comments I wanted to make before we end. In case you want to say something specific, you want to any point
I think there were just some questions. Maybe we can do them offline because I think this
Yeah, okay.
further
So there are one or two things which I felt, like this malnutrition thing you mentioned, in India, anemia, which is quite prevalent. More than 50% women are anemic. So somewhere at a younger age, if you are nurturing this idea that what should be the needs of the boys and the girls and the members of the other family, according to their needs, they should get their nutrition. So I think that part is very interesting because, and through that you are conveying a message of equity also, not just equality. That, not equitable distribution of resources, but as per the needs each one should get. So I find that, and regarding this idea of community taking ownership and contributing, I think in India of late, this sexual harassment at workplace, there is a new law in place. Earlier, many years, there were guidelines. So I think this law, which was envisaged by Justice Verma, late Justice Verma, with the idea of bringing together all these players, whether the NGO, the community, as well as the corporate. I find that, many corporates which were up till now flouting the laws and, now because this issue has come into prominence, you might be knowing last year there was a Supreme Court intern who filed a case against a judge. That too, a retired judge after 1 year of the incident. And after she filed, there was another immediately girl also who was an intern who filed. So that emboldened suddenly there is a law, but it was not being followed. But somebody took the guts to write, and because one journalist came into the news, the Helka was a news magazine, and which was a social relevant magazine, and he is accused now, he is in Goa being tried. So I find that this is one opportunity because what Justice Verma envisaged was that there should be democratic processes, that the woman should first approach the internal complaints committee of the organization and then go to an outsider if required, including police and all. I find here this mechanism is doing good, and there are, I think we have members here who are part of committees and who are training functionaries, the government functionaries.
Hello.
I think I'll end here. We have, I think that corporal punishment, we have Milind, who is a part of an campaign to stop this corporal punishment. So you need to have actively, and he's also, very interestingly, he's also talking about the ARC and, using the right. So, we'll end here. So I think basically all the stakeholders, they have a role to play, and I think we have covered family, business, NGOs.
Thank you.
Thank you. And just a suggestion, I think that everybody knows this. I've been told that for the plenary you need to have a badge.